We're back. Yeah, we're going to be jumping into the next essay of the Abolition for the People series. There were a couple recently that touched on the origins of SWAT, and this one really gets into the weeds on that a little bit. And is this one was written by Stuart Schrader. He's a research scientist of sociology at Johns Hopkins University. Has been studying the prison system and social theory for quite a few years now, and teaching courses in those areas as well. So this should be an interesting dive. Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. And we're over here. Okay. Glad things are mostly working for the stream today. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and get the music back on as well. Just have something to listen to as I read this. Okay. SWAT's paramilitary fever dream. Let's zoom in a little bit. Good, that looks like that's pretty good. Okay. When police play soldier, everybody loses. The militarization of police departments has only intensified an ongoing cycle of failure and oppression. By Stuart Schrader. Around 1968, a gutty little ragtag outfit linked up on the streets of Los Angeles. This group traded expertise with friendly Marines and began studying guerrilla warfare. Its members soon obtained weapons just like the ones U.S. infantry soldiers carried in Vietnam, and the group's leader came up with a snappy name to signal his desire to rule the city's streets: Special Weapons Attack Team. But for a band of sworn law enforcement officers, the name was too provocative, and the white leader of the new unit, who recounted this history in his memoir, complete with hackneyed action movie descriptions, would go on to be the chief of the LAPD for 24 years. Begrudgingly, Daryl Gates changed his elite group's moniker to Special Weapons and Tactics, or SWAT. So we've heard the name Gates before, insofar as being like a terror in LA. This is very telling that it was initially Special Weapons Attack Team, and he was forced to change the name just largely for PR reasons, but this speaks very much to the mission of it, which the author gets into here. Nevertheless, attack was the team's primary mission, and the Black Panther Party was its highest value target, necessitating the party's own primary mission at the time: self-defense. LAPD SWAT attacked the headquarters of the party's Southern California chapter on December 8, 1969. This was the event that we read about a little bit ago, about how they just stormed the place. After incapacitating the Panthers with tear gas, police officers fired 5,000 rounds, wounding 6 Panthers. Using tear gas to make the barricaded targets easier to shoot with conventional firearms was a tactic taken straight from the U.S. war in Vietnam. If you're running the numbers there, 5,000 rounds to wound 6, not a great precision rate. That is not people that are being particularly discerning with their shooting. That was also the episode, I don't think it mentions it here, but just as a reminder, that was also the episode where about half of them at that headquarters were women and children. Yeah, that's about 10 minutes of solid shooting. This violent episode, according to writers like Radley Balko, inaugurated police militarization, the adoption of military weapons, vehicle, armor, and tactics in everyday policing activity in American streets. Police now look like soldiers, and their mission increasingly seems to resemble the types of counterinsurgency that the United States has pursued in Iraq and Afghanistan. Heavily armed raids, often based on electronically gathered intelligence. Critics of militarization typically argue that using this gear alienates police from regular people, increasing the likelihood of violent encounters, and has no place in a democracy that cherishes a strict division of domestic policing and foreign military action. Yet looking more closely at the LAPD's response to political protest indicates that thinking about the police as a domestic body and the military as an international one is reductive. Police in the United States have long looked beyond borders and to the military for help resolving problems of their own making. Police militarize when they are in crisis, relying on innovations that are a product of U.S. empire. The ongoing effort to force the rest of the globe to accede to the designs of Washington and Wall Street. This is basically the, I would say, the main thesis of this, and he gets into more detail, but he's correct that those who are critical of this often miss the mark. They miss the point that this is largely by design, and it creates a feedback loop. Police are looking to be heavier-handed in response to pushback from them being heavy-handed, and it will end in a endless cycle until they're like literally dropping bombs on cities. Oh right, that happened in Tulsa. No. Hi Mona, how are you? Welcome. Because I am going to do this, but I'm not going to dwell on it more than that. Most of you all know Mona. Okay. In the 1960s, before Daryl Gates created SWAT, some of LAPD's top officers were already operating far beyond city limits, as I've illustrated in my book, Badges Without Borders: How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing. At the request of the Attorney General in 1962, Los Angeles sent a pair of Spanish-speaking cops to the Dominican Republic to impart lessons on riot control to the police there, fearing that communist subversives were planning to foment civil unrest. The LAPD maintained a reputation for expertise in controlling unruly crowds. These officers brought LAPD training manuals to the Caribbean, while also introducing tear gas and recommending the use of batons. In the short term, these LAPD efforts seemed to pay off. At a large demonstration in Santo Domingo, less than 2 weeks after the officers began training local cops, the police did not turn too violent, and the crowd dispersed without much trouble. But in April 1965, there was a coup. A revolutionary upsurge overwhelmed the police, leading to a brief civil war. President Lyndon Johnson feared communist forces were gaining the upper hand. He ordered the U.S. military to invade. When open hostilities ceased, the Dominican Republic's police were reconstituted as a far meaner and vicious force. Soon, the U.S.-trained police would be responsible for political persecution of leftists, including torture, forced disappearance, and cold-hearted murder in the streets. So, what I find interesting about this is the absolute just fear of just being an activist for leftist ideas. That was seen as so far beyond the pale. Like, you aren't even allowed to argue the ideas. Like, conservatives here in America, they're all up in arms about like getting banned on Twitter and stuff sometimes, but leftists have a fairly long history in capitalist nations in America and other places of literally being rounded up by cops and executed. Like, this is a thing. So that's, that's what political censorship actually looks like, for anyone wondering. It's not, I got banned on Twitter for breaking terms of service. And that's also why I get very, very nervous when I start hearing politicians fomenting fear about anti-fascists here in America, because what they're doing is they're dog whistling for this kind of police response here to those who are advocating for anti-fascist ideas, for more leftist ideas. Mona. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it our right to tell marginalized people to do? Yeah, no. Right, so continuing on, compare this sequence of events to what happened in Los Angeles in the 1960s, culminating in SWAT. There are eerie parallels when looking at the Watts Rebellion of 1965 and its aftermath. In both instances, police were overwhelmed, the military got involved, and then the police returned even meaner. This paragraph is repeated later, but it's an important one. We'll pause on it when we get to it. After an incident of police brutality involving a black motorist, Marquette Fry, and his brother and mother on August 11, 1965, exaggerated but plausible rumors began to spread about police attacking a pregnant black woman. Watts residents began protesting, and in response, cops ran wild, acting even more unhinged than usual. Looting, shooting, fires, and mass arrests ensued. The situation quickly became the most destructive civil disorder the 20th century had yet seen. The National Guard patrolled in jeeps and cargo trucks, wearing helmets and carrying bayonet-tipped rifles. And then, once an uneasy calm had returned to the streets, the LAPD became even more venomous against Black and Chicano activists. Notice that he doesn't say who started this looting, shooting, fires, and such. We've looked at a lot of protest footage, and we've talked about protest movements and how very, very often escalation starts when police begin the escalation. Very often it is a peaceful demonstration, and then they start boxing people in, start provoking violence, and the moment a fist is thrown or a shield is pushed back against, it goes out of control. And when the cops start a open shooting violent event, we do often see that manifest in, breaking things and starting fires. It's not before, it's when they provoke that defense response from a otherwise peaceful but passionate protest. I also would draw the parallel, and I believe he does later, to what we saw in the Black Lives Matter protests more recently. The famous images of Asian Americans defending their businesses from rooftops happened because the cops didn't include Asian neighborhoods in their defense of white areas. Oof. Yeah, that tracks. Scrolled too far. Determined never to be caught off guard again, the LAPD created 2 new units in ensuing years. SWAT was joined by the Public Disorder Intelligence Division, a secretive outfit that spied on activists and even on some elected officials. By the early 1980s, one of the officers the LAPD had sent to the Dominican Republic, in fact, became the leader of that division. Meanwhile, Gates touted SWAT's successes at adopting military tactics, offering blueprints for other police forces around the country to militarize when they ran into trouble. And again, the trouble is, it's not trouble like people are, arming and trying to go and storm the state capitol. I mean, that is something that we saw, but it wasn't the left doing it. And they didn't respond in police force to that. The trouble they're referring to is being unable to shut down a protest of sufficient size. Like, that's really what he's flirting with here. While this deals primarily with black and communities of color, I would also point out that this exact pattern was seen at Stonewall around kind of the same time frame. That was, our LGBT brothers and sisters. And yeah, again, militarized response to that. Anyway, continuing on. This pattern is global. American police commanders declare that their officers are so well trained and experienced that they should teach cops everywhere how to do their jobs. When those cops inevitably falter in a crisis, whether civil unrest or apparent crime surges, officials come to believe more aggressive approaches are necessary. Then the military gets involved. The police commanders, in turn, take new lessons from the more militarized approaches. These become the new baseline, and anyone who opposes them becomes an enemy. Police militarization is the way police forces compensate for their own failures and mistakes. Police admire the military because it models what they want to be, an extremely well-resourced, technologically sophisticated, tactically effective, and widely respected instrument of state violence. So when police seem insufficiently trained, undisciplined, or even corrupt, commanders will look to the military for models on how to improve. Those improvements rarely occur, but in the process, the police adopt military weapons. The Pentagon has transferred $7.4 billion in surplus weapons and supplies to the police since 1997, while additional materials have come from private donations, other federal sources like the DHS, or state and local budgets. Accompanying this gear is a martial mentality that makes leaving the precinct house seem like a mission into hostile enemy territory. Let's see. Yeah, I haven't heard of any non-isolated issues since the open mob warfare in the 20s where the cops suffered for lack of firepower. Yeah, it's... And like what we've talked about many times on this issue is becoming more heavy-handed is not the answer unless your goal is to subjugate and put more people into prison or kill them. This is not protecting and serving. It is not aligned with that mission. It is not actually intending to benefit people. It is... He rightly points out that this is the problem. Police look to the military, they admire the military, they think the military is beautiful, and so they want to emulate that and get the respect for being, military. But the goals are totally different, or should be, because the military is designed to subjugate an area. It is not designed to improve the living conditions of those in that area. Right? And that's what we should want out of a domestic peace force, is a group that is intended to look to the needs of a community and make sure that community is well taken care of. At almost any point in the past 120 years, we can find examples of this cycle, as police seek help and guidance from the military. And each round of police militarization at home has built upon a foundation already forged abroad. The question before us right now is whether the cycle will continue after the rebellions of 2020. It will, if we don't change it. And the resistance we're seeing from police unions suggests that a whole lot more social pressure is going to be needed to actually change this. That gets to a comment that I believe Donnie made in chat a little bit ago about needing to make sure that people stay politically active here in the Biden administration. Like, Trump is out, but that's not the end of problems here in America. It just means we have a chance to sincerely talk about them without being rounded up and called for mass arrests just for talking about them. We have to make use of the time that's been given to us. Anyway. In the past few months of protest against police violence and racist abuse, police have frequently worsened the situation. Yeah, I am too, Donnie. That's part of why I keep trying to beat the drum and make sure people are still talking. It's the most we can do. In the past few months of protest against police violence and racist abuse, police have frequently worsened the situation. In city after city, protesters have faced violent assault by heavily armed police, from officers in Brooklyn using their vehicles as battering rams on crowds, to cops in Philadelphia firing tear gas at fleeing demonstrators pinned against a barrier. In only a few cases has the National Guard intervened, and military leaders balked when the Trump administration considered using soldiers to crush demonstrations. But the baseline, as everyone has seen, is already a highly militarized force, and it has failed miserably at lessening the intensity of protest. In fact, police accomplished the opposite, spurring the most sustained and widespread period of political unrest in the United States in decades, if not ever. Arguably the Civil War was longer, but still, it is a good point that and also even in our military books, strategy books, like, all military theory suggests that this kind of response, if you're not going in to actually eradicate your enemy, this kind of response only creates counterinsurgency and strengthens it. And I'm not saying that, the BLM movement is a counterinsurgency. I'm saying that it is an insurgency. Yeah, I'm stumbling on words here. What I'm saying is, we know, and it is in our strategic books, that if you go into an area and you just rough up the population, you create an appetite for resistance to your presence there. And that is something that we have seen. Yeah, Afghanistan, exactly. After the proverbial smoke clears, when the expert studies are finalized, the retraining is complete, and a newly equipped force is unleashed, we must ask, what will the next iteration look like? Will the police militarize even further, taking inspiration from overseas operations? Police crises like the current one inevitably cause police to look for outside help. The demand to defund police is a prophylactic against this possibility. When protesters chant, defund the police, cops respond, but who will come to rescue you when you're in crisis? We could turn the question back on the police. What if you didn't have the military to rescue you in your moments of crisis? And this new question opens onto a new horizon of abolition and of hope, a world without police or soldiers. That is the abrupt end of this essay. He has written a number of other works, but those are very interesting questions. Yeah, and Donnie, you're totally correct on all of those examples. In each of those cases, it's if you go in and you tussle with the enemy, unless your goal is, let me say this. In military theory, there are two paths to actually stopping civil unrest or like guerrilla warfare type stuff. One is you improve the conditions such that the people no longer want to do it. The other is you eradicate the people. There isn't an in-between option. All of our understanding of military theory says that any half measure results in an increase in unrest. Now, we've tried in some countries to help build up infrastructure and such, but this author is right to point out that a lot of our efforts to create stability in regions is in basically training and militarizing their police forces, giving them arms and armaments and theories about how to subjugate their populations. And I would argue that that is deliberate, because we want many of those countries that we're interfering with to be unstable. It is hugely, and I'm not saying that people in, dark rooms are saying, oh, we're going to get those Middle Easterners, but there is definitely a incentive from a war perspective in having a destabilized Middle East and South America and such. So if we go in knowing what we do about military theory, and we train their police forces to do this and then pull back, and then do it harder and then pull back, that creates a cycle of civil war. It demands it. Would you put massive oppression on the population as the second? Like China? Yeah, so China actually does eradicate, they go for eradication. If there is a group that is starting to push back against China, I don't think that's the second option. I think they're going for the third option. They did eradicate the leaders and such. They shut down most of the most vocal, and they responded with such force and with the intent to do a slaughter that they basically quashed the appetite for it. So while they didn't kill every last man, woman, and child, China, they do respond by either arresting or killing enough of them, and they do it early. They do it early and often to any sort of unrest in their borders. That's why, the stuff that you saw in Hong Kong more recently, those movements were very small. And their response was huge. It was disproportionately large. And they, they definitely lean into the third option more than trying to do anything middle of the road. Yeah, and Shalun is correct there. The other tool that China has is they aggressively prevent the spread of ideas to the extent they can by actually legitimately censoring people. They have mechanisms to do that are, thankfully, as yet, unadopted by most of the rest of the world. But yeah, That would be my interpretation of China. I could be wrong, or I could be inaccurate in some cases. So much for the pleasant fantasy that free markets spread democracy. Yeah. Democracy spreads the best when it is shown to function. Democracy is currently, in my opinion, on decline worldwide because many democratic nations, including the United States, who we love to thump our chests about being like a pillar of democracy, are in a backward slide, largely not due to the democracy side of things, but due to anti-democracy and due to capitalist encroachment on government. So, like, you look at America, and yes, more people have gotten the vote, technically, and that's a very good thing. We have women's suffrage, we have, the Civil Rights Act and getting the vote, to all people of all color. However, we also have taken many, many steps to minimize the importance and undermine the importance of that vote. And to make the government less and less responsive to people's needs. In America, attitudes towards governance, especially Congress, is at almost a historical low. And those create, attitudes around the world of, well, if it's not working for America, then who needs it, right? Right. Yeah, Shalon. And that is a concern anywhere that a country decides to restrict news flow. It would be nice if we were more like Scandinavian countries. Yes, there are a lot of things that we could learn there. They have their flaws, but they're a marked improvement in many, many ways. I do agree with the author here on the question of what will the police look like. There are tiny seeds of hope here and there. As Liam rightly pointed out, change is generational. And the current generation, broadly speaking, is very against police power. Attitudes are shifting generationally. We don't want to live under the boot of cops who are decked out in riot gear. There are a couple cities that have been experimenting with it. Camden, New Jersey, and there was another one very recently. Was it? Let me look in articles. Right. What was that? Sorry. It's fat. But what city was this? I can't find that. Ithaca. City of Ithaca. Basically gutting their police department. And these places that are experimenting with this and just basically resetting what law enforcement in their area is intended to do seem to be having very positive effects. It runs counter to everything we've been hearing about we need more police, but these efforts have resulted in lowering of crime rates and of improved attitudes towards law enforcement by all of the community, because their mission is basically being taken away and reestablished. But yeah, let me link this up. This was the article on the matter. And if we don't get there to just straight up like abolishing the current system, this cycle will continue until police and the military are completely indistinguishable. It's something that dystopian writers have known about for some time and have written about for some time. It's why, in those hyper-capitalist setups, like Shadowrun and Cyberpunk and Blade Runner and RoboCop and all this, cops are not normal. They are given free rein to do whatever they want, and they engage everyone that they engage with just a callous military approach. Yeah, those are science fiction, but they're based on an understanding of what's actually going on. So anyway, I found this interesting, this observation of how police started down this road and just basically use any stumbling block as an excuse to become more militarized, to be very poignant, and it's an observation I had not thought about before. I knew police do militarize, and they have been getting more military weapons and such, but I hadn't made the connection that it's basically in response to any challenge to their authority, I guess, is what provokes it, or any perceived challenge to their authority. And so when the thing being protested is police violence, their answer is, we're not violent enough. That can't be allowed to stand. But that, I think, is going to be the final note on this essay on Stuart Schrader's SWAT's Paramilitary Dream. Let me try that one again. SWAT's Paramilitary Fever Dream. That was the 6th of 30 essays in the Abolition for the People series by Kaepernick Publishing. I strongly recommend it as a read, but we are covering them once a week, so we've got a long way to go. And yeah, we're going to be covering similar topics from time to time, but I think every one of these is worth reading and worth analyzing.